Alright, before we start, yes, I know that everything is a little askew. That's because I broke my tripod. If I don't have you tilted a little bit at this angle, this is what happens. Yep, bye. But to get right into today's video, this is my, I think, only second and final of this year Austen and August video. I definitely intended to do more. That's always the case, but as is always the case, things went haywire fast, as they always do. These last few weeks my brain has just been gone. I can't talk straight, I can't type straight. I keep wishing everybody good lick instead of good luck in the giveaways. Like, it's just, it's a whole thing. So anyway, last time we took a look at some more unusual Austen retellings that I had read. So things that, whether they're set in the Regency times or they're set now or they're set in the future, it doesn't matter. They just kind of push the envelope in ways that you don't normally get from Austen retellings. Today we're going to look at some of the more traditional ones that you would expect to kind of get from an Austen retelling. These are all things that I've read over the last year or so, and most of them within the last couple months, because I have been binging. Even this month, apparently can't get enough of Austen, because normally I kind of read everything leading up to August and then I take a real hard break, but this year I'm reading through August, and last year I read through August and into like November, all Austen. So, you know, I've just committed. This is who I am now. So, let's get into them. The first is a duo that I read. Actually, I think there are more than 2 books, but I read 2. Mr. Darcy's Pledge and the follow-up, Mr. Darcy's Challenge, by Monica Fairview. Now, I had read Mr. Darcy's Pledge, the first book, towards the end of last year, but like I said, I was reading a bunch of Austen things just in quick succession back to back, and so by the time we got to this year, I had forgotten pretty much what happened in any of them. They all just ran together, so everything I'm going to talk about almost today, I had to reread this year. And then when I reread it, I moved on to the next book, Mr. Darcy's Challenge, because it kind of leaves off in the middle of things. I feel like Challenge wraps it up, though, even though it does go beyond that into another book, or maybe even a more expanded series. Those 2 books do give you the complete story. And I did like them, though they are not without issues. So there are times that Monica Fairview comes out with something that sounds very Austen-esque, sounds very pithy and wise and witty, that Austen was known for. And so in that respect, I think it really shined. And I did like the story. However, this one kind of centers around, I mean, it's just a different take, but in this, Darcy doesn't give Lizzie the letter that he writes when she's at Hunsford. I just don't know that I believe Lizzie's reversal into liking him and believing that he has changed or he's different without that letter. You do kind of eventually get to where she's maybe experiencing things that would make her question, you know, Wickham and Darcy and whose character is actually decent, but I think it just doesn't quite lay that believable groundwork that I need to see the 2 of them come together. I did like Georgiana's kind of expanded role in this and how she's a little bit of the instigator in the romance. I do like stories that kind of make her a little more active and put her in a position of encouraging her brother to be happy. I like that. I will say, though, that as the story went on, especially into book 2, that I felt like there were just too many different plot threads going, and it definitely needed some proofreading. I caught a lot of things that were repeated, like a sentence repeated or a paragraph repeated, or redundancy in the words, easily fixable and easily catchable errors that weren't caught. I think a good editing pass might have also tightened up the plot and the extra plot threads. So just something that bears mentioning, but I did enjoy it, and I do think that Monica is one of the better ones at occasionally capturing Austen's tone really well. The next is His Good Opinion. Nothing but glare. There we go. His Good Opinion by Nancy Kelly. This is the first in a series as well. We're starting to lose the camera. Get back into your askew position. This one gives us Pride and Prejudice from Darcy's perspective, and it starts a little bit earlier, so right after Georgiana does her thing. And that was kind of the main strength of it for me, is that you get more of a understanding and a little bit more of a sympathy for why Darcy is the way he is in the beginning. He's just had a lot of shit go on, and he's a little bit shaken by it all and a little bit upset by it all, and really kind of focused on that, and that makes him a little more standoffish. And I thought that was a really kind of important tack to take, I think, and that was where its strengths lie. There was a tendency, though, in trying to give every aspect of Pride and Prejudice through Darcy's eyes to become a little bit bogged down, and it sometimes felt a little bit long. It's not that I disliked it, but it's just that some JAFF writers tend to do this thing where they feel like every single scene from Pride and Prejudice needs to make it into their retelling, almost word for word, and then they just give the characters like internal dialogue so you get their reaction to what's going on. And that works in bits and pieces, but when you do it with everything, it starts to feel a little silly and like the ground has already been trod. We don't need to go over all of it again. Give us some of the key bits. We're already Pride and Prejudice fans, or we wouldn't be reading this. We knew what happened. Give us some of the things that are going to be most kind of illuminating for your version of the story and your characters, and give us some of Austen's words sprinkled in. But I just don't like it when an author feels the need to put every scene followed by that character's reaction to every scene. It just starts to kind of, number one, build too much of a predictable rhythm, and number two, bring the story to a grinding halt. Now, this is not the worst offender in this by any means. I've read some that just are relentless when it comes to this, but it did happen a little bit too much for my liking, and it made it feel a little bit tiresome towards the end of the book. But that said, I did really enjoy it, and I intend to continue with the rest of the series. And I liked Nancy Kelly's take on things. I think she also did a fairly good job of trying to imitate Austen and make it seem really period in the way it's written. Every now and then some things happen that will take you out of that Regency feel, but for the most part I think she really worked at that, and it shows. Up next, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour from the strict retellings into one that's Austen-esque-ish, and that is Dangerous Alliance. You can't see that at all. Dangerous Alliance by Jenica Cohen. This one is not so much a direct retelling of Austen as it is a Regency sort of slightly thriller mystery-ish thing centering around a character who is obsessed with Austen. So it's like a J-Knight bit of Jane Austen fanfiction. This one's coming out in December, I believe, and I recommend, whether you're an Austen fan or not, looking into this one because it was super fun. If you're a hardcore purist in your Regency stories and you want everything to feel very period and a little bit fancy pants and sedate, this might not be the book for you because it's YA, it's a little bit brighter and snappier and fun and lively, and it has a little bit more of a modern feel. It's not so much that the characters talk like they're from the OC, but it's certainly not the most traditional and like perfectly calibrated Regency speech or anything like that, or feel for that matter, but it is just so damn fun. And the main character, who just is obsessed with Austen, and she kind of relates everything in her life to Austen and how she should be and what she wants out of life. She relates to characters and moments in books, and it was just really charming and fun. So there are those Easter eggs if you are an Austen fan, but it's not so centered around that you would be kind of driven away if you haven't read Austen or you don't like Austen. At its heart, it is a romantic mystery, I guess, in which there are some bad things happening from bad people, and manners and the marriage mart happening on the other side. This main character in the middle who's got to figure out how to make everything come out right and end up happy and keep her family happy and safe. So it's just really interesting and fun. I had a blast reading it. It was one of those things that I didn't want to put down. Kind of reminds me a little bit of The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, which again has that kind of feel, but definitely updated and modern and just super fun. Great tone. So I recommend looking into it and picking it up if that's your thing. Back into the traditional side of things, I read 2 novellas by Maria Grace. The first is Inspiration, and the second is Snowbound at Hartfield. I'll start with Snowbound, which kind of brings together characters from a few different Austen books and locates them snowed in at Hartfield with Emma Knightley and her dad. So it brings together some unlikely characters, actually, that I think might excite some JAFF readers who want something different, and that is Colonel Fitzwilliam and Darcy and Lizzie, along with Elizabeth Elliot and her dad, all snowed in at Hartfield, and that makes for some shenanigans and some interestingness. Because it is a novella, things happen very quickly. Some people might want things to be a little bit more fleshed out in the romance and the character development, and I totally get that. However, I do think it's really interesting kind of seeing these different perspectives for Colonel Fitzwilliam and Elizabeth Elliot and how they might work together. It's really neat seeing it all pieced together, and I liked it. I am a fan of Maria Grace. I tend to talk about her every year, and she's always part of Austen and August. And I like how she approaches stories and how she kind of deconstructs and then puts back together. So she takes a what if and she allows the characters to be who they would be in that scenario and not just carbon copies of Austen's characters acting as they always did, even though their surroundings and their sort of setup is totally different. She kind of takes a more psychological approach to it, which I really enjoy. The other one, Inspiration, I really wish was a full-length novel. It is about Darcy as an artist, and so the reason he's so critical and always watching and always nitpicking and critiquing is because that's his artist's brain at work, just looking at everything as an image, as a whole, and as flawed parts. So it makes it really interesting, and it kind of uses Elizabeth as his muse, as his thing that kind of reignites his spark, which is really interesting. But because it's a novella, I felt like it just wasn't developed enough. I would have loved it as a full length if it had really dug into the characters in this scenario and who Darcy is in this scenario and the actual creation of the art, things like that. I think it really could have been stellar, but it did feel a little bit underdeveloped for me just because it was so quick. Also, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure at one point Darcy is painting watercolor on canvas, which, unless the Regency people knew something that I don't, doesn't really work that way. You need cotton paper for watercolor. Canvas wouldn't really do it, but that's just whatever. That's neither here nor there. I did also read about half of another book by Maria Grace, and then I realized at one point that it was actually the third book in a series. So I set that one aside and maybe we'll talk about it next year. The only other one I want to talk about, and this one I'm just going to talk about very briefly, in theory, because it's not coming out until next year, is the Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner. This one is, I don't even know when it's coming out. Summer. It's quite a while until this one comes out. So actually I'll probably do like a more detailed full review for next year's Austen in August, since it's coming out in summer, but just briefly to kind of get it on your radar. This one isn't so much an Austen retelling as it is a love letter to Janeites and to Jane Austen herself, and it's about the formation of a Jane Austen society dedicated to preserving her memory and promoting her in Chawton, and just embracing her in this small community, encouraging people to embrace her and to visit and to share their love. So it's kind of like the proto-Janeites. And from there it expands into each of their stories, Jane Austen's kind of place in their life and their place in each other's lives. And it has a kind of slow, like small town country life pace that I really love, that kind of pastoral feel that I know is off-putting for some people that really don't like slow paces, but you guys know I love slow burn. I love the building, and this takes place over quite a number of years at different stages in these characters' lives as they come together and move apart, and just the impact that they have on each other and that Jane has on them. I think the slow pace suits that. It suits that story. It suits the time, the sort of post-war, like, slowing down, taking a breath time. And it also just suits how they come together. It suits the characters themselves and how everything works out. So I'm not going to get more into it than that right now, other than to say I really enjoyed it. I think it's one of those books that will end up like in literary book groups. It has that kind of feel, you know? And it's just really nice, just really nice and well done. So one to put on your radar for next year. But that is it. LOL, that's definitely not it. I knew I was going to forget something. And of course I don't have it in front of me, but I also was reading the short story anthology Rational Creatures, which was edited by Christina Boyd, kind of in bits and pieces over this last year. So I don't tend to read anthologies straight through. I read them when I'm in the mood for them, and I pick and choose which story I want to read. I don't start at the beginning and go straight through to the end, because I'm a rebel like that. So I've just been kind of picking and choosing stories from that. And then earlier in the month, Christina sent me the audiobook for it as well. So I listened to some of that. I listened to pieces of stories that I had already read, and then also some stories that I hadn't, so I could get a feel for the narrator versus the stories themselves. And just overall, I'm going to say I really enjoy it, and I think that whichever way you go, whether you go with the text or the audiobook version, I don't think you can do any wrong. I think finding a good anthology is kind of difficult, but when you do, especially for a retelling anthology like this, it's not only a great way to get kind of bite-sized takes on stories or smaller scenes, maybe connecting scenes or expanded scenes, behind the scenes. I've said scenes enough. It's not only great for things like that, but it's also so great for finding new authors. It's this risk-free way to try out someone's storytelling, their tone, their sensibilities, what they bring to the table. And I think especially for Jane Austen fan fiction, because there's so much out there, an anthology is the way to go if you can get your hands on one. And you can get your hands on this because it is in the Kindle Unlimited, so you can read it for free if you're a member of that. But also, it's available in print and ebook and audiobook form. So, like, lots of ways to kind of test it out, and I recommend it because I enjoyed it. And I will continue to read my way through and discover new people and have some other books to seek out as a result. So, recommend. But now that really is all, I think. For now, that is all of the other non-weirdo, non-unusual Austen books that I've read recently, at least that I remember. There are definitely more that I read than this towards the end of last year, but I just didn't have time to reread all of them to remember what I thought of them. So maybe next year you'll get some thoughts on the other half a dozen or so that are sitting in my Kindle, fully read and mostly totally forgotten. If you have read any of these, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you've read any other sort of Austen-esque books or Austen retellings that you've loved or hated, let me know those as well, because I'm always on the hunt for more. You know this about me. You hush your face. You're just a little cat. Yeah, you heard me. But that is all for this video, and that's all for Austen in August. So thank you guys for joining me. If you haven't... Casanova, come on, man. If you haven't already, you should definitely stop by Austen in August because there are a ton of giveaways going, and they're still going on right now. So you can still enter to win. Many of them are international, and you can get your hands on a number of awesome books, including some of these. But thank you guys for watching, and until next time, happy reading!